The Times Square 42nd Street subway station was nearly empty at 11:30 on Thanksgiving night. Most of New York City had retreated into warm homes, full bellies, and the comfortable chaos of family. But not everyone had somewhere to be. Not everyone had someone waiting. Tae-hyun Choi sat alone on a metal bench on the downtown platform, his $6,000 suit jacket folded neatly beside him. His white dress shirt, 4 buttons undone as always, was wrinkled for the first time in years. The tiger tattoo on his neck seemed to snarl in the fluorescent light. He didn't look up when footsteps echoed across the tile. He didn't care who saw him. For 34 years he'd been taught that emotions were weaknesses, that tears were unforgivable, that a man who cried was a man who'd already lost. Tonight, Tae-hyun Choi had finally lost. Across the platform, a woman and a little girl sat down on a bench, their Thanksgiving leftovers packed in reused containers. The woman pulled her daughter close, whispering something that made the child giggle. And then the little girl looked over, looked right at him, and saw something no one else had ever bothered to see. She slipped off the bench and walked toward him, her beaded braids clicking softly with each step. "Don't cry, sir," she said, her voice small but steady. "My mom and I are here." Tae-hyun looked up, and for the first time in his life, he didn't know what to say. Amelia Johnson had been on her feet for 14 hours. Her back ached, her uniform smelled like antiseptic, and all she wanted was to get home, tuck Emma into bed, and collapse on the couch with a cup of tea. But Emma had insisted they stop by the hospital cafeteria to grab whatever Thanksgiving dinner they could afford. 2 turkey sandwiches and a slice of pumpkin pie to share. It wasn't much, but it was something. They'd missed the earlier train and now waited on the near-empty platform. Amelia pulled her daughter close, feeling the weight of another long day settle into her bones. She was 31 years old and sometimes felt twice that. 3 years since Marcus died. 3 years of double shifts and overdue bills and making sure Emma never knew just how close to the edge they really were. "Mama, look," Emma whispered, tugging her sleeve. Amelia followed her daughter's gaze to the man sitting alone across the platform. Even from a distance he looked expensive, tailored suit, perfect posture, the kind of presence that made people move out of the way. But there was something broken in the way he sat there, staring at nothing. His shoulders were tight, his jaw clenched, like he was holding back something too big to name. "He looks sad," Emma said quietly. "Baby, we don't—" Amelia started, but Emma was already moving. "Emma, get back here!" But her daughter didn't listen. She never did when someone needed help. Emma walked right up to the stranger, stopped a few feet away and tilted her head to study him. Amelia's heart hammered as she rushed over, ready to apologize, ready to pull her daughter back. But before she could say a word, Emma spoke. "Don't cry, sir," the little girl said softly. "My mom and I are here." The man looked up slowly, and Amelia saw his face clearly for the first time. Sharp features, dark eyes rimmed with exhaustion, and a tattoo curling up his neck. A tiger mid-roar. He looked dangerous. He looked devastated. He looked at Emma like she'd just spoken a language he'd forgotten existed. "Emma, honey, let's give the man some space," Amelia said gently, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "I'm not crying," the man said, his voice rough, accent barely there. American-born, she guessed, but with something else underneath. "I don't cry." "That's okay," Emma said simply. "Sometimes my mama doesn't cry either, even when she's sad. But Aunt Ruth says it's okay to be sad. She says that's how you know you're still alive." The man blinked, and for a moment something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. He looked at Amelia, really looked at her, and she saw the question in his eyes. "Who are you people?" "I'm sorry," Amelia said quickly. "My daughter has a big heart and no sense of boundaries." "She's not wrong," the man said quietly. He looked back at Emma, and the smallest, saddest smile tugged at his mouth. "What's your name?" "Emma Johnson, what's yours?" "Tay," he said after a pause. My name is Tay. 30 years earlier, in a pristine townhouse in Koreatown, Manhattan, 6-year-old Taehyun Choi learned the first and most important lesson of his life. Tears were unacceptable. He'd fallen off his bike in Central Park, skinned both knees, and limped home crying. His father, Sungmin Choi, a man whose silence carried more weight than other men's screams, had looked at him with cold disgust. "Stop that noise," his father said in Korean, not even bothering to check the blood soaking through Tai's pants. "You sound like a girl." "It hurts, Appa." The slap came fast and sharp, splitting Tai's lip. "Crying is for the weak. Do you want to be weak?" Tay shook his head, biting down on his trembling lip, tasting blood and salt. "Then stop. Now." Tay stopped. He swallowed the pain, blinked away the tears, and stood perfectly still until his father nodded once and walked away. That night, Tay cleaned his own wounds in the bathroom, not making a sound. He was 6 years old, and he'd already learned that love was conditional, that affection was earned through silence, that his father's approval, rare and cold as winter sunlight, mattered more than anything else in the world. By the time he was 10, Tay had perfected the mask. Straight posture, blank expression, voice level and calm. No emotion, no weakness, no cracks. His father ran a legitimate import-export business that everyone knew was a front for something darker. Money moved through their house like water, but warmth never did. His mother had left when he was 3, gone back to Seoul, his father said. Though Tay suspected the truth was uglier than that. Thanksgiving dinners at the Choi household were quiet, formal affairs. His father's associates would come, men in expensive suits who spoke in euphemisms and never smiled. Tay would sit at the table, eat in silence, and listen to conversations about shipments and territories and debts that needed collecting. He learned the family business the way other kids learned multiplication tables. By 15, Tay was running errands. By 18, he was running crews. By 25, he'd taken over when his father had a stroke that left him paralyzed and mute, a cruel irony that Tay tried not to find satisfying. He visited the nursing home once a month, sat by his father's bed, and reported on business. His father would blink once for yes, twice for no. They never spoke about anything else, they never had. "I've expanded into Queens," Tay said on one visit, his voice flat. "Opened 3 new restaurants. Legitimate fronts, like you taught me. The money's clean on paper. One blink, approval. I'm seeing someone," Tay added, testing. "A girl from the neighborhood. She's—" 2 blinks. Disapproval. Tay nodded, unsurprised. He broke up with her the next day, not because he didn't care, but because caring was a liability, because his father had taught him that love made you weak, made you vulnerable, made you soft. And in their world, soft men didn't survive. By 34, Taehyun Choi had everything his father wanted him to have. Power, wealth, fear, respect. He had an empire. He had control. He had nothing at all. The train pulled into the station with a metallic screech, but Emma didn't move toward it. She was still standing in front of Tay, studying him with the kind of unfiltered curiosity only children possess. "Are you hungry?" Emma asked suddenly. "We have extra turkey. Mama always gets too much." "Emma," Amelia started, embarrassed. "We don't have extra, baby. And I'm sure Mr. Tay has somewhere to be." "I don't," Tay said quietly. The admission surprised him as much as it surprised them. "I don't have anywhere to be." Amelia studied him for a long moment. She saw the expensive suit, the dangerous tattoo, the carefully controlled posture of a man used to being in charge. But she also saw something else, a loneliness so profound it made her chest ache. She'd seen that look before in the mirror, in the months after Marcus died. "We're heading back to Brooklyn," she said slowly. "Crown Heights, if you want. You could come have something warm to drink. My Aunt Ruth always makes too much tea." It was a ridiculous offer, inviting a stranger, clearly a dangerous stranger, back to their home. But Amelia had learned long ago to trust her instincts about people, and something in this man's eyes told her he wasn't a threat. Not to them, anyway. Tay should have said no, should have walked away, gotten into his town car, gone back to his penthouse in Tribeca. But when Emma reached out and took his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his without hesitation or fear, he found himself nodding. Just for a little while, he heard himself say. The train ride to Brooklyn was quiet. Emma sat between them, swinging her legs and humming something under her breath. Amelia watched the city blur past the windows, wondering what the hell she was doing. Tay sat perfectly still, hyper-aware of the small hand still holding his, wondering the same thing. They got off at Kingston Avenue and walked through streets strung with Christmas lights that somebody had put up too early. The neighborhood was alive even this late. Bodegas still open, groups of teenagers on stoops, the smell of jerk chicken and fried plantains mixing with the cold November air. It was nothing like the sterile luxury of Tay's world. It was real. It was messy. It was home. "That's us," Emma said, pointing to a narrow brownstone squeezed between two others. The paint was peeling, the steps cracked, but the small front garden was tidy, and warm light glowed behind the curtains. Amelia unlocked the door and called out, "Aunt Ruth, we've got company." An elderly black woman appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. She was small, round, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at Tay, at his expensive suit, his neck tattoo, his carefully guarded expression, and smiled like she'd been expecting him. "Well, well," Ruth said, her voice warm as honey. "Looks like the Lord sent us one more for supper. Come on in, baby. You look like you could use a good meal and a soft place to sit." Tay stood in the doorway, suddenly uncertain. "I shouldn't intrude." "Nonsense," Ruth said firmly. "It's Thanksgiving. Nobody should be alone on Thanksgiving. Now get in here before you let all the heat out." Emma tugged his hand, and Tay let himself be pulled inside. At 28, Tae Hyun Choi sat in the back office of his flagship restaurant, Hwarang, in the heart of Koreatown. On paper, he owned 5 high-end Korean establishments across Manhattan and Queens. On paper, he was a successful restaurateur, second-generation Korean-American success story. On paper, everything was legitimate. The reality was uglier and far more profitable. "The shipment arrives Tuesday," his Lieutenant Jun said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Port of Newark. Same route, same contacts." Tay didn't open the folder. He didn't need to. He'd built this operation from the ground up after his father's stroke, expanding carefully, methodically, the way his father had taught him. Drugs moved through his restaurants. Money laundered through his legitimate accounts. Protection rackets operated under the cover of security consulting. He'd taken his father's small operation and turned it into an empire. And he felt nothing. "Any problems?" Tay asked, his voice flat. "The Russians are pushing into Flushing. They're not happy about us expanding into their territory. Then they can be unhappy. We're not stopping." Jun hesitated. "They might retaliate." "Let them try." Tay's voice didn't rise, but the temperature in the room dropped several degrees. "I didn't build this by backing down. If they want a war, they'll get one." Jun nodded and left. Alone in his office, surrounded by expensive furniture and meaningless success, Tay stared at the city through his window. 34 floors up, Manhattan glittered like a jewelry box. He owned pieces of it now. Territory, businesses, politicians, cops. He had power that would have made his father proud. He visited the nursing home that night, like he did every month. His father lay in the hospital bed, eyes open but empty, body motionless except for the slight rise and fall of his chest. The stroke had stolen his movement, his speech, everything but his consciousness. He was trapped in his own body, aware of everything, able to express nothing. Tay sat in the chair beside the bed and delivered his monthly report. "Revenue is up 18%. We've expanded into 2 new territories. The restaurants are profitable on their own now. We don't even need the other operations to stay afloat." He paused. "You'd be proud." His father blinked once. Yes. I'm seeing someone, Tae added, though he wasn't sure why he mentioned it. Ji-yeon, daughter of the Kim family. Good match. Strategic. One blink. I don't love her, Tae said quietly, but I don't think that matters. You taught me love doesn't matter. Only power matters. Only control matters. His father's eyes didn't change. One blink. Agreement. Tae stood to leave, then paused at the door. Did you ever love anyone, Appa? Did you ever love Mum? Did you ever love me? Silence. His father stared at the ceiling, unable to answer, unable to move, unable to explain 3 decades of coldness and control. And Tae realized with sudden bitter clarity that even if his father could speak, the answer would be the same. The silence was the answer. He left without saying goodbye. He broke up with Ji-yeon the next week, not because he'd learned anything, but because he realized he was becoming his father, successful, powerful, and completely, utterly alone. 6 years later, on Thanksgiving night, that realization would bring him to a subway platform and to a little girl who would change everything. The Johnson house was small, cluttered in the way homes filled with love always are. Photographs covered every surface. Emma as a baby, Emma's first day of school. An older photo of a young man in military uniform that Amelia's eyes lingered on for just a moment. The furniture was worn but clean, covered with crocheted blankets and throw pillows. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and vanilla. Tae stood in the doorway, completely out of place in his $1,000 shoes, and felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. This house was everything his childhood home wasn't. It was warm. It was messy. It was alive. Sit down, Ruth insisted, steering him toward the kitchen table. Amelia, warm up some of that sweet potato casserole. Emma, baby, go wash your hands. Tae sat awkwardly at the table while the women moved around him with practiced efficiency. Amelia reheated food. Ruth poured sweet tea. Emma reappeared and started chattering about her school play. It was chaos. It was beautiful. It was everything Tae had spent 34 years pretending didn't exist. So, Tae, Ruth said, settling into the chair across from him with the confidence of someone who'd interrogated plenty of young men in her time. What do you do? I own restaurants, Tae said carefully. Korean food, in Manhattan. That right? Which ones? He named them, watching recognition flicker across her face. They were well-known, expensive, the kind of places people went for special occasions. I've heard of Hwarang, Amelia said, setting a plate in front of him. Never been, but I've heard it's beautiful. It is, Tae said. Then, surprising himself, he added, You should come sometime as my guests. Oh, we couldn't, Amelia started. Yes, we could, Emma interrupted, bouncing in her seat. Can we, Mama, please? Amelia shot Tae a look that clearly said, See what you've done. But there was a smile tugging at her lips. We'll see, baby. Eat your dinner. They ate together, and Tae couldn't remember the last time he'd shared a meal that wasn't a business meeting or a silent, formal affair. Ruth asked questions. Where he grew up, where he lived. Did he have family? Tae answered carefully, editing out the violence and crime, painting a picture of a life that was almost true, almost normal. And your family? Ruth asked gently. They're not in the city. My father is in a nursing home, Tae said. Stroke. He can't speak or move. I'm sorry to hear that. Do you visit him? Once a month? That's good. That's real good. Ruth reached across the table and patted his hand, and Tae nearly flinched at the casual affection. Family is important, even when it's complicated, especially when it's complicated. Emma had fallen asleep with her head on the table, one hand still wrapped around her fork. Amelia scooped her up with practiced ease. I'm going to put her to bed. Tae, you're welcome to stay for coffee if you want. I should go, Tae said, standing, but he didn't move toward the door. Ruth studied him with those sharp, knowing eyes. You can come back, she said quietly. Anytime you want. Doors always open. Tay looked around the small, warm kitchen, at the photographs and the laughter still echoing in the walls, and nodded slowly. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." He left, but he knew he'd be back. 6 hours before the subway platform, Tae Hyun Choi sat at his father's bedside on Thanksgiving afternoon, doing what he did every year, keeping a promise nobody had asked him to make. The nursing home smelled like disinfectant and cafeteria turkey. His father lay motionless in the bed, eyes open, watching Tae with that same flat, evaluating stare he'd perfected decades ago. Tae delivered his report. Business was good, territory was secure, revenue was up. His father blinked once, the only sign of approval he could still give. "I should go," Tae said, standing. "I have a dinner, business associates." His father's eyes didn't change. No goodbye, no warmth, just the cold acknowledgement that duty had been fulfilled. The dinner was at Jun's house in Queens, a sprawling new construction filled with Jun's wife's family, loud with conversation and laughter, and children running through the halls. Tae sat at the table, perfectly dressed, perfectly composed, perfectly separate from the warmth around him. "More wine, Tae-hyung?" Jun's wife asked, using the honorific for older brother, even though they weren't related. "No, thank you. You should eat more. You're too skinny. Jun, give him more bulgogi." "I'm fine," Tae said, his voice perhaps a bit too sharp. The conversation flowed around him. Family gossip, jokes, arguments, all the messy, comfortable chaos of people who loved each other. And Tae sat there, feeling like he was watching through glass. These people welcomed him, fed him, treated him like family. But he wasn't family, he was their boss. The fear and respect in their eyes whenever he spoke made sure he never forgot that. Jun's 6-year-old daughter climbed into Tae's lap without warning, showing him a drawing she'd made. A lopsided house with stick figures holding hands. "That's my family," she announced proudly. "That's Daddy. That's Mommy. That's me and my brother. Do you have a family?" The table went quiet. Jun started to pull his daughter away, but Tae held up a hand. "No," he said quietly. "I don't." "Why not?" "I don't know," Tae said, and realized it was the truest thing he'd said in years. The little girl patted his cheek with her small hand. "That's sad, you can share mine if you want." Something cracked inside Tae's chest. He set the girl down gently, stood and made his excuses. Jun followed him to the door, concern written across his face. "Hyung, you okay?" "I'm fine." "You want me to drive you home?" "I'll walk." "Walk? It's miles to Tribeca. I said I'll walk." Tae left before Jun could argue. He walked through Queens as the sun set, his expensive shoes marking time against the cold pavement. He walked past houses lit up with families, past windows framing lives he'd never have, past the evidence of everything he'd sacrificed for power and control and his father's approval. By the time he reached the subway, it was nearly midnight. By the time he sat down on that platform bench, he was exhausted. Exhausted from walking. Exhausted from pretending. Exhausted from 3 decades of being exactly what his father wanted him to be. And that's when a little girl with beaded braids had walked up to him and said the words that broke him. "Don't cry, sir. My mom and I are here." Tae came back 3 days later, then a week later, then every few days, finding excuses to stop by. He brought groceries. He fixed the leaking faucet in the kitchen. He helped Emma with her math homework, his precise analytical mind making easy work of third-grade fractions. 2 weeks in, everything changed. Tae was walking Emma home from school, something he'd started doing when Amelia's shift ran late. Emma chattered about her day, her backpack bouncing with each step. They turned onto her street, and Tae saw it immediately. A black Mercedes S-Class parked 3 houses down from the Johnson brownstone. Wrong neighborhood for that kind of car. 2 men leaning against it, leather jackets despite the cold, expensive watches catching the winter sun. The way they stood, relaxed but alert, marked them as predators. His blood went cold. Albanians. "Emma," Tae said quietly, his hand finding her shoulder. "We're going to walk past your house. Don't look at it. Just keep talking to me about your spelling test." Emma, smart kid that she was, heard something in his voice and obeyed without question. They walked past the brownstone, past the Mercedes. Tay kept his body between Emma and the men, his posture casual, but his mind calculating exits, threats, options. As they passed, one of the men called out in accented English, "Nice girl, Choi. She yours?" Tay didn't respond, didn't look back. He walked Emma to the bodega 2 blocks over. "Wait here with Mr. Kim," he told her, handing her money. "Get yourself a snack. I'll be right back." "Tay, you're scaring me." "I know, sweetheart. But I need you to trust me. Stay here. Don't leave until I come back." He crouched down to her level. "Can you do that for me?" Emma nodded, her eyes wide but trusting. Tay walked back alone, every instinct sharp and cold. The mask he'd been letting slip snapped back into place. The Mafia boss, the enforcer, the man who'd built an empire on calculated violence. He approached the Mercedes from the front this time, moving with deadly purpose. The older of the 2 men straightened. He was maybe 45 with a strong jaw, graying hair slicked back, and eyes that had seen too much death to be impressed by Tay's reputation. A thick gold chain glinted at his throat. "Tae-hyun Choi," the man said, his Albanian accent thick but his English clear. "I am Besnik. I work for Luan Hoxha. You know this name, yes?" Tay's jaw tightened. He knew the name. Luan Hoxha, head of the Shkiptar operation in New York, a man whose word was law among the Albanians, a man who lived by Besa, the ancient code of honor that demanded absolute loyalty to one's promises. "What does Hoxha want?" Tay asked, his voice flat. "You made promise 2 years ago," Besnik said, pulling out a cigarette. "You and Luan, you shake hands. You say, 'We divide territory, we respect borders, we keep peace.' This is Besa, sacred word. I kept that promise. I haven't touched Albanian territory." "You broke Besa when you leave," Besnik interrupted, lighting his cigarette. "You walk away from agreement without speaking to Luan, without asking permission. This is disrespect. This is insult to his honor. I'm out of the business entirely. I'm not a threat to anyone." "You think honor is about threat?" Besnik laughed, a harsh sound. "You think Besa is about money or territory? No. Is about respect. Is about keeping word. You shake Luan's hand, you are bound. Forever. You want out? You ask. You negotiate. You don't just disappear like coward." The second man, younger, stepped forward. His hand moved inside his jacket, not pulling a weapon, just reminding Tay that it was there. "Luan wants to see you," Besnik said. "Tonight. Red Hook. The warehouse by the water. You know the place." "And if I don't come?" Besnik's eyes flicked toward the Johnson brownstone. "Then Luan sends message. And Albanian messages, they are not gentle. That little girl, beautiful child, so innocent. She should not pay for your dishonor, yes? But Besa demands payment, blood or respect. Your choice." Tay stepped closer, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "If anyone touches that family, I will hunt down every Albanian in this city. Luan, you, every soldier, every associate, every cousin twice removed. I will make it slow. I will make it public. And I will make sure your precious Besa becomes a warning story about what happens when you threaten the wrong man's family." Besnik didn't flinch. Big words. But Luan, he does not fear threats. He only respects honor. Come tonight, talk like men, or don't come and we talk different way. He flicked his cigarette into the street. Your choice, Choi. They got in the Mercedes and drove away, leaving Tay standing on the sidewalk with his hands shaking, not from fear, but from barely controlled rage. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Jun, I need everything on Luan Hoxha and the Albanian operation. Current strength, locations, weaknesses. And I need security on an address in Crown Heights. Discreet, armed. 24/7. He paused, looking back at the brownstone where Emma was probably wondering why he was taking so long. And June? If anything happens to me tonight, you make sure that family is protected, no matter what it costs. Swear it. June's voice was worried. Hyung, what's happening? I'm fixing a mistake, Tae said, one way or another. The war wasn't over, and this time, he wasn't fighting for territory or money or power. He was fighting for the right to protect the only family he'd ever loved. Chapter 4b. Past. The Albanian Agreement. 550 words. 2 years before the subway platform, Tae Hyun Choi sat across from Luan Hoksha in a private room of a restaurant in Astoria, Queens, Albanian territory. The meeting had been carefully arranged. Neutral ground, both sides armed but committed to talking first. Luan was not what Tae had expected. He was younger, maybe 38, with sharp features, dark eyes that missed nothing, and an old scar running from his left temple to his jaw. He wore an expensive leather jacket over a crisp white shirt, and a silver eagle pendant hung at his throat, the Albanian symbol of pride and independence. You want peace, Luan said in accented English, his voice surprisingly soft. After you kill 3 Russian lieutenants, now you want peace. Interesting timing. The Russians pushed into my territory, I responded. But I don't want endless war. I want stability. I want agreements that hold. Tae kept his voice level, professional. You and we've never had conflict. Our operations don't overlap. Why should we? Luan leaned back, studying Tae with the intensity of a man who'd survived by reading people accurately. You know what is Beza? I've heard of it. Albanian Code of Honor. Not just honor. Sacred promise. Word is bond. More important than blood, than money, than life. Luan's eyes were hard. My father died keeping Beza. He promised protection to a family, and when they were attacked, he fought to death defending them. This is what Beza means, you understand? I understand keeping your word. Do you? Luan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. In your world, Korean, Russian, Italian, promises are negotiable. Alliances shift. Loyalty depends on profit. But with Albanians, Beza is absolute. Once given, cannot be taken back. Once accepted, cannot be broken. Even death does not release you. Tae felt a cold warning in those words, but he needed this alliance. The Russians were regrouping. Other organizations were watching for weakness. He needed the Albanians neutral, if not friendly. I'm offering you respect, Tae said carefully. Clear territorial boundaries. No interference in each other's operations. Mutual support against outside threats. A partnership built on trust. Trust, Luan repeated, tasting the word. Americans use this word too easily. Trust must be earned. But Beza is given. Once, only once. If broken, there is no second chance, only blood. I keep my promises. We will see. Luan stood, extending his hand. I accept your offer. We divide territory. You keep Manhattan and the Bronx, I keep Queens and parts of Brooklyn. We do not interfere with each other's business. We warn each other of outside threats. We keep peace between our families. Tae stood and shook his hand. The grip was strong, deliberate. This handshake is Beza, Luan said, his eyes locked on Tae's. Sacred promise. You understand what this means. If you break this agreement, if you betray this promise, I will not negotiate. I will not forgive. I will take blood. From you, from everyone you love, from everyone who carries your name. This is Beza. This is Albanian way. I understand. Do you? Luan held the handshake a moment longer. Because your father, he understands only power. Your Russians, they understand only fear. But we Albanians, we understand honor. We remember promises, we never forget, never forgive. If you give me Beza and break it, you make enemy that will not stop until you are dead, or we are dead, No middle ground. Then it's a good thing I plan to keep my word, Tay said. Luan smiled, releasing his hand. Good, because I like you, Taehyun Choi. You are smart, you are controlled, you are not greedy like others. I think maybe we do business for a long time, yes? Maybe even become friends. Maybe. But know this. Luan's voice dropped to something colder. Friendship and Besa are different things. Friendship can end. Besa cannot. You walk away from friendship, I understand. You walk away from Besa, I hunt you. Remember this. Tay nodded, thinking he understood. Thinking it was just another business arrangement dressed up in cultural tradition. He'd make the deal, keep the peace, expand his operations with one less enemy to worry about. He didn't know then that he'd just bound himself with chains stronger than any contract, any threat, any violence could create. He didn't know that 2 years later, those chains would tighten around not just his neck, but around the necks of the people he'd come to love. He didn't know that Besa wasn't just a promise, it was a prison. That night, Tay returned to Manhattan and reported to his father at the nursing home. I secured peace with the Albanians, clear borders, mutual respect, no interference. His father blinked once. Approval. They have some code of honor called Besa. Very serious about keeping promises. One blink, his father understood. I gave my word, shook hands. It's done. One blink. What Tay didn't say, what he didn't yet understand, was that in giving his word to Luan Hoxha, he'd created a debt that could never be paid except in blood or eternal loyalty. 2 years later, when he tried to walk away from everything, that debt would come due. And Besa always collects. Tay didn't tell them about Besnik, didn't tell them about the Albanians, about Besa, about the black Mercedes that had marked their home. Instead, he put security in place. Discreet surveillance, a rotation of his most trusted men, weapons distributed to those who knew how to use them. And then he prepared to do what he'd been avoiding for 2 years. He went to face Luan Hoxha. The warehouse in Red Hook was exactly where Besnik said it would be, isolated, right on the water, the kind of place where screams wouldn't carry and bodies could disappear into the East River without a trace. Tay arrived alone at midnight as instructed. He'd left his gun in the car, a calculated risk. But bringing a weapon to this meeting would be read as an insult worse than breaking Besa. The warehouse door was open. Inside, a single light illuminated a small area where Luan Hoxha sat at a simple wooden table, 2 chairs across from each other. 6 men stood in the shadows around the perimeter, armed, watchful, ready. Tay recognized the setup. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a judgment. Luan looked up as Tay approached. He wore the same leather jacket from 2 years ago, the silver eagle still at his throat. But his eyes were colder now, harder. The eyes of a man whose honor had been insulted. Taehyun Choi, Luan said quietly. Sit. Tay sat, meeting Luan's gaze directly. I came, as requested. As